So then you can put things on it like, you know, so it looks like David Cameron's stuck that out his door.
Yeah.
Just things like that. It's quite, I've got a David Cameron mask. So he's standing there with Bring the Troops Home. It looks like he's standing outside his house in Downing Street. It's quite funny.
Yeah.
I was saying, this fence here has never been fenced off in the history of this country. So it's got no access to the people at all. It's had 24-hour security ongoing since June 2010. So we're now in September 2011. And basically they're waiting for a High Court injunction to make all this illegal along here.
Really?
Saying it's obstruction. Which I think is going to be hard to prove in court, but they want that argument because now they've brought a new law in, which is called the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. It's been passed, it's got royal assent. I can't find it at the moment, it's not been printed up because it's had amendments. But basically the part that concerns Parliament Square basically states that from now on, anybody bringing any article that will enable them to sleep or stay here during a night time will become banned, illegal, and your equipment will be confiscated. So in other words, no tents, no sleeping bags, no structures or anything. So yeah, they're saying you can come, you can demonstrate, but when you know, it's a reasonable time, you need to go. And there's no way that you're going to be able to stay here ongoing. The reason it's become ongoing here is very, very simple. We've got a war that's nearly 10 years ongoing. And plus, during that time, it spread when Afghanistan, we attacked there first, the Royal Navy with American troops into Afghanistan. Of course, then we started, that was 2001. We were partly involved in that. Then, of course, we went into the Iraq War 2003, and now it's escalated. And now we're back big time in Afghanistan again, but and also they're attacking, drones attack and bomb Pakistan every day. It's not mentioned in the news. We're not at war with Pakistan, and yet this is what's happening. People are being killed every day. And now, of course, we're in Libya. You know, and the next minute there'll be uprisings in Syria.
What's the next one? It's probably
Well,
Syria.
exactly.
Mexico.
Well, any country that steps out of line and wants to do things its way, then obviously, you know, they want to control it, don't they? And that's the problem. And the big issue is in the distance is maybe not too far off Iran. But if they were to go for Iran, I mean, it's so they've got so much capability, if you like. It would be very unwise to do so. But I mean, does any of it make sense? Anyway, so you know, we can't trust them not to. Because none of this makes sense anyway. You know, if you look at the polls right through from 2001 to now, internationally, people don't agree. Ordinary people do not agree with this war, what we're involved in, and yet they won't listen to us. So that's the interesting part. When we come to Democracy Village, that was set up in 2010, we were heading for a general election. It was more or less certain that it would be a hung parliament. So that was the prediction. Because obviously everybody had enough of Labour, Tony Blair, and then Gordon Brown, who basically took over from him. But this equally didn't listen to us. And then you've got the Conservatives, which people didn't really want. So what choice is there? And the Liberals are too small to do anything. So basically we were heading towards a hung parliament. None of the three main parties were speaking at all about the war and wanted to bring them home. So we knew that wasn't going to happen. So there was an occupation of the square during the time that they're away at their constituencies looking for votes.
You squatted the square?
Yes, for 3 months. Now during that time there was the most direct actions ever in the history of this country. Banners, Parliament, the Abbey, the church here, the Treasury building, the War Office, the tree at the Downing Street. There was even banner drops off the High Court of Justice. The Democracy Village.
There was a banner drop, you just had some...
Oh, banner drops off buildings, yeah, bring the troops home, bring our soldiers home alive. I mean, it's incredible. Never in the history of this country have I had so many banner drops.
Was there a lot of media coverage?
Well, there wasn't, and most of it went abroad. It seemed to be more people from Europe and journalists that they realised what was going on. It caught their imagination. Here it was the opposite. It was just, they tried to make out that it was a camp full of disenfranchised hippie drunkers,
Yeah.
druggies. Unfortunately, that is what it did become.
Did it?
Yes, because they couldn't get rid of it. You've got a brand new government. It's a coalition government. They've been speaking in the manifestos how they're going to represent people, how they're going to bring back the right to protest, how they're going to champion protest. So when they come into power, all of a sudden, we've got a camp here on Parliament Square, huge marquees, tents, everything. So what can they do? They can't go straight in. On one issue alone, we would have had the country behind us, and they wouldn't. So they realise that. They think, oh my gosh, this is very dangerous ground. What do we do? So anyway, they sought a High Court injunction, and eventually what happened, the thing is that the camp did deteriorate because people got tired, and there was an awful lot of alcoholics, homeless people joined, and basically outnumbered the activists. So in the end, the activists wanted to leave, and then it did become a shambles. It became what they said it was, if you like. Whether that was done deliberately, I mean, is your guess is as good as mine. But they needed to discredit it. They couldn't discredit it on the issue that it stood for, so they had to discredit it another way. So I would imagine people
I wouldn't
were
would have asked them
encouraged.
to have set up something.
Yes, well, I saw a
to
broad
bust
daylight.
over a load of homeless people and push them
Well,
in and said, there you go.
We're in Parliament Square, so
Yeah.
one of the highest security areas in the world, but during the day I saw myself and witnessed beer barrels being rolled onto the square.
You know.
So, and nothing being enforced. So the point is they were encouraged to get drunk, and then of course at night time it slid into mayhem, as you can imagine. So, but the actual message of Democracy Village was incredibly powerful, and it was so powerful. This is testimony. The fence is here. It's never happened in history, and they fear that even now. So that's why they're desperate to get all this gone. So there's a new law come in, basically now to make this outlawed. Now, it's not in print at the moment because it's just been passed. It's got royal assent, but it hasn't gone through the sort of, that presumably they have to write it all up and print it all. And obviously police have got to get grips with the legislation and the lawyers. So what we're doing is next month we're going to court on a High Court injunction. I think they'd like it to be dealt with that way because it's not so messy. Whereas if we deal with it directly with the new law, then of course that concerns protest, and then of course it then shows up that is political for them wanting to get rid of this, because there's no harm being identified in what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So we face big challenges, and to be honest, the country doesn't realise that this law's been passed. No? And our media is so swarmed with so many things. People just got to the point now where I think they just can't take on board all these issues. We're right now in the time of Dale Farm, of course, the big travellers camp in Basildon, in Essex, and basically they're going to, presumably, as it stands, they're going to evict them on Friday. So, but there's been a huge support internationally for them. And I think the biggest danger that they see there is because apparently the actual site is very, very well managed and maintained. But the problem is we need to go back to communities. That's the most important thing that we need to do. We don't know each other anymore. We're strangers, but we're encouraged to be strangers. It's strange that you can be encouraged to be a stranger and be suspicious of everybody, but they don't mind you getting drunk and ending up in bed together. Isn't that strange? You've gone from one extreme to the other, but it's still then you get up and you're still strangers, so you part company. This isn't good for life, it's not good for morale, it's not good for your own psyche, and it leads to many, many social breakdowns. So I think that's probably the biggest tragedy of our time. People are very, very lonely, and hence you've got Facebook. But how can you have all these friends on Facebook, and how can you possibly know them anyway? You know, but they're pushed down that road, aren't they? And it's quite, we need more direct contact with people, proper communities. Even now they're not addressing the problem. We've had these riots this summer, but that's because a lot of people are really, really frustrated. They're not being listened to, you know? So, and they're kind of angry, and then, you know, that young man that was killed, sadly, that sparked off a whole load of incidents. But I think it's not because people have got criminal tendencies, it's because a lot of the time we've got communities where you are worthless. You know, you're worthless, we don't have a job for you, you can't read or write because the education hasn't encouraged you to that point. or you've been disrupted or whatever, for whatever reason. And you've got to a point now where there's nothing in our society. There used to be community centres, places to meet, places to visit. See you a bit later. Okay, thanks Mark. Now, but they encourage you. Cheap booze, drinking, cheap drugs. The whole country's overflowing with drugs. They know, the government know, they extended the licensing hours. You can be drinking 24 hours a day if you want. You know, there's nightclubs. Isn't it sinister to go into a place 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, especially if you're underage, which a lot of kids are. They're at school still. I know that for a fact. And but nobody says anything. Nobody cares. If a young girl leaves a nightclub 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, goes out into the dark, she's totally not with it at all. Maybe somebody spiked her drink. They allow them to walk off. Instead of saying, excuse me, look, sit down here, have you got a phone number, let's ring somebody. They let you go off into the darkness. Maybe with a stranger then following you. And it's like, no one's responsible. There's a lot of sinister things that we've allowed to happen. And yet the government then is the first one to tell you off for, you know, for being drunk and disorderly and not being responsible, being lazy.
It's very regulated here. Because I know that Ireland is sort of following your example.
Oh, you are following. Yes, last
Absolutely.
time I was in
There's
Cork
more and
a few...
more of these, you know, the cameras and the rules coming in.
Well, you don't do so much singing in Ireland now, do you? Every time you went to a pub, there's people singing, they'd walk in and they'd just start singing. It was perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Now that's dying away.
Well, everyone's suspicious.
Exactly, but before it was the most normal thing to do.
Yeah.
And then I'm living in this country. I did live in Ireland. I've got relatives there, so I did go over. It was perfectly natural. Somebody to walk in. Oh, here's Sean. He's gonna, and he'd just sing, and everybody would stop, and some people would join in. Great, but even that's dying away there now because people are becoming, as you say, suspicious, frightened, inhibited. This is not good. My auntie, where she lived, they had opened up near the university. They opened up all these nightclubs, and she said going home 2 or 3 o'clock in the night or early in the morning, if you like, there'd be not just young boys but young girls being sick in the gutter and weeing in the gutter openly. And you would never have seen that one time, but now, because people are so far gone on the drink and the drugs, they don't know what the heck they're doing. And if you go to these countries, this has been going on for years. You know, places like in Greece, where they go and they go in a nightclub and they work up to a frenzy. They drink, they've got drugs being passed around, and then they're out in the streets. And I've had lots of accounts of people saying to me, so, you know, where people are having sex in the street, on the floor, on the pavement, anywhere, everywhere. It's just like a debaucherous society from biblical times. You know what I mean? Now they know all that goes on, and it's allowed. And but it's not normal, is it? Because this drink and the drugs is being pushed and pushed and pushed. And then, of course, we're now falling into that same pattern here in our own lives, you know. And it's becoming very, very destructive. Some girls, aged 22, they might have had 2 or 3 abortions. It's not mentioned at all. So there's a lot of injury we're doing to our own young people, but it's not addressed. And it will be addressed when it becomes a major problem. But that's why people are not happy, and we're never going to be happy in this country, particularly youngsters, because they're more sensitive. When they know that we're at war with a country where a lot of people are totally defenceless. Innocent civilians are being killed, children, every day in these countries. We're responsible. We are. They know that. They read, they check the internet, they know what's going on. They don't like it. You know, we want to be proud of our country. We don't want to think that we're the equivalent of what Nazi Germany would have been in, you know, in the 40s. But in a sense, that's what we are. We're just not aware of it. We've got nice blue sky today. It's nice and peaceful, nice and calm. But, you know, our country's involved in a very immoral, just war that's been going on for too long. I think ultimately it's not going to come from the governments. You know, it's got to come from ourselves as ordinary people. for us to stand up and say, look, you know, we can't fight them on their own terms. It's not going to work. Now in this country they've passed it where they can use, if they need to, water cannon and plastic bullets. And they've gone down that road since we had these riots. They're saying, well, we might need to because the society is so unruly. But that means that, you know, they are potentially able to turn against us big time if we start to march or cross the line, what they think, if we oppose them. And if there is another war looming up, or we want to end this war, people have got to, you don't have to meet head on together in a confrontation, but, you know, we can empower ourselves not to be part of the system, or, you know, we need to have a kind of general strike for peace. Not for anything that you want or I want. I don't want anything. It's not for, you know, when normally you go on strike for your job, better pay, better work conditions, maybe better holidays. But really, we need to start to go on strike because then we're on the higher moral ground, which has nothing to do with self-gain, but for other people who are victims of this corporate wars, business. That's basically what we do here. I'm on strike, I've been on strike 5.5 years. So I'm not in the system at all. And I'm not on benefits. I'm completely independent. So obviously people can't do that themselves. They've got lives, they've got university, college or whatever, families. But the thing is, we need to know that we can if we need to. That's what we really need to know. We're all very, very powerful. We don't have to conform, we can pull out. If it meant saving lives, it'd be worth it, you know? Shut down the country for a week, 2 weeks if we need to. We'd still survive, of course we would, you know? You can survive. Hunger strikes can go for 40 days. I mean, that's, you know, Jesus Christ was in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. So that is a kind of telling point, isn't it? So long as we can drink, we can survive, you know? We're not going to collapse if we don't have a McDonald's this evening. It's not going to happen. Human beings are very, very strong and very resilient, and we should learn to trust in ourselves, you know? Not to think, because we tend to think we're weak, but we're not. We're very, very strong. And we need to use that power, but in a peaceful way, but in an ultimate way that is effective. And that's just to say, no, I'm not going to comply. What's interesting, if you follow me, I'll just show you a picture.